I think when we're in that state of kind of fight or flight, it's really difficult to press the pause button. What's helpful in those moments is that we practice, as much as we can to integrate these things and to build, those muscles of mindfulness and meditation and all the things when we're not stressed, so that we can more easily access them in the times that we need them the most.
Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Hello, thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the podcast. Today's guest, Aisling Quigley, is on a mission to positively impact mental health through meditation, through her retreats, her courses, and her beautiful community initiatives. And I was very lucky to be part of one of those, her Take Back Your Mind series. And Ash will talk to us a little bit about that in today's conversation as well. Ash, I love the way Ash works. She shares evidence-based tools and practices, and she really is passionate about helping others to live a life that's more considered. It's not something that we hear a lot these days, about really being considered in the choices we make and the things that we do. A life with more ease, a life with more energy, and a life with more purpose. And I invited Aisling today to join us for our podcast because just listening to Aisling and her beautiful Irish accent, her beautiful calm composure, it's really evident listening to Aisling and the way that she lives and breathes the work that she does, that she lives a life of calm and ease. And I'm sure she has her ups and downs like the rest of us. But Aisling's going to really be talking to us today about meditation, about the different ways that she supports people, and the ways meditation can be so powerful in a life with or without anxiety, and how it's so important for our mental health. So, Aisling, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, goodness. I really love the opportunity to talk with you again. We've obviously spoken before when we were in opposite seats, weren't we? You were interviewing me and we were having a similar conversation, but for your beautiful Take Back Your Mind series. And thank you for joining us today. And I wanted to start by asking you about how you came to do the work that you do, because life hasn't always been like this for you, has it?
No, it certainly has not. And I guess listening to that introduction, I think it's always a real humbling experience when you hear someone else relay the work that it is that you do. And I listen to it and I think, oh gosh, how privileged I am that I get to call that work. And it is such a wonderful thing. But as you said, it wasn't always the case. And I guess, as you mentioned, my name, it's Aisling. It's Irish. It actually means a vision or a dream in Irish. And I guess a little bit about me is I am a daughter, a sister, a wife. I'm a proud godmother and an auntie. And my background and journey, I guess, began all the way back in those days in Ireland. And right back, I guess, to when I was a child. And for me, in the life that I lead, I believe that our life can very much change in a moment. And the reason why I believe that is because I know mine ultimately did. And it was really a series of moments that changed the outlook or the trajectory of my life as it unfolded and how I got to do the work that I do today. And starting off, I guess, I was an anxious child. I had big feelings. I felt a lot and in a really big way. And that ability to navigate my inner world and be able to process all that I felt on the inside was something that I found really difficult to do. And it wasn't only that, it wasn't only, those inner feelings, but also I took on a lot from everyone around me. I very much cared for, understood and felt the way other people were living and going about their lives. These days we might call that an empath, but I definitely didn't have that word at the time. But back then, without the tools and the strategies to navigate that, it was actually what I recognize now as a pretty heavy load to carry as a child. And that, I guess, paired with the fact that I was a high achiever, I liked to be liked. My parents were wonderful and loving and supportive and told me I could go on to do anything that I put my mind to. So I studied hard. I went and got good grades. Teachers seemed to love me. I was always the one with my hand up saying, I'm first, I'm finished. But, which at the time would give you about 2 seconds of happiness. But then for some reason, and definitely I feel self-imposed, that never seemed to be good enough. And one of those first moments that I recognize as being quite pivotal goes back to when I was 8 years old. I was in the school ground, in the yard outside having play at recess. And one of the girls in my class, we were all gathered around as a group of friends, and she remarked on the size of my thighs, of all things. And she went on to ask everyone in the group how much they weighed. And for me, I said it out loud and was met with laughter and made fun of, and it really wasn't a very nice experience at all. And because I did care about so much of what people thought and what so much people thought of me, initially I really thought there was something wrong with me. I felt like I was the odd one out, or I was not good enough again, as I was. And that feeling like I was, I guess, the odd one out, it carried through with me throughout the course of a lot of my life. Although from the outside, it seemed like I had plenty of friends. From the inside, when I was with people, I would rehearse conversations. I would play out full scenarios before I would go and meet someone. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was the onset of my anxiety that was really starting to kick in. I really didn't like groups. I was now what I term an introverted extrovert. I loved more one-on-one. And I always remember before I would go into a group, I would be really mindful and wary of how much I would say, or if I spoke too much, I'd give myself a hard time. Another moment that really sticks out to me was when I was 13, and I was in high school and sat next to my best friend for 6 years. And although I didn't know it at the time, she was going through a very real and lived experience with an eating disorder. And on the surface, she was an A+ student, another high achiever, did really well in sports, had so many friends, teachers loved her, was beautiful, big hit with the boys. But I started comparing, and that's really where I started the downward spiral, I guess, of comparison for me, which was started comparing myself to an unrealistic standard that she had, but also that I was starting to put on myself. And that was really when my relationship with my mind, but also my body, started to be challenged and suffer a little bit. And when I found myself with those thoughts, I recognize now that all I would say to myself was, if you just worked harder, if you just did more, then it would all be okay. So a bit of a vicious circle. Then 2 more points of, I guess, what kind of led me to the point I'm at now was one when I was 17. I started seeing a boy who was a lot older than I was, and actually, when I look back on it, was very, very controlling. He put me down a lot, and he liked to govern who it was that I spent my time with, which meant I kind of shut off a lot of my friends and my family. And although they all told me that he was bad news and, I should say goodbye, it actually took for him to break up with me and absolutely tear my little heart into pieces for us to part ways. And from there, I felt, because I had really pushed away my family and friends, that it was really difficult for me to go and ask them for help. And so I was really challenged by my head and, that voice that was constantly telling me I wasn't good enough and I didn't feel like I had the support around me. And that was the point where my own eating disorder began. and went on for many years, unfortunately. But then the pivotal moment, I guess, happened when I was 21. And that's when my panic attacks started. I went on again for many years and became more and more frequent. I left my uni degree with first class honours, the highest mark that I possibly could get, and did really well. Landed what was on paper seen as a dream job. Everyone thought, Aisling has made it. She's on her way, but I really couldn't keep up with the demands of the high-paced, fast, moving, high-pressured job with the voice, that harsh voice, and the demands within my own mind. And that led me up into a point where I still didn't feel like I fit in. So I didn't feel like I ever really had that support network around me. And I still felt like that 8-year-old back in the schoolyard. Until one Tuesday morning, and that was about 8 years ago. And I'd been working through the night. I was exhausted. I'd been on a global conference call till 2 a.m., which was the usual. And I remember that feeling. My heart was racing, my palms, my hands were sweating. I walked in and saw the flashing red light on my phone on my desk, and the computer that had an inbox full to the brim with emails, and that just general feeling that, oh my gosh, I'm in, that dreaded feeling, I guess, of just needing to do more. And because I wasn't supporting myself, my body, my mind, in the way that I would have needed to really, and I don't give myself a hard time about it because that's all I knew, but it wasn't very supportive, and it wasn't helpful in me navigating that world. And so I ended up on the bathroom floor in my office. I'd passed out after a panic attack. And yeah, the panic attack, as I said, they weren't irregular, they were something I was used to, but this was the first time I'd actually passed out. And when I came to, I recognized now that panic attack was really the catalyst. That was the one thing that said to me, hey, Ash, you need to make some changes here. And it was from that moment that I went on to start investigating tools and practices and strategies. I practiced things like yoga and meditation. I went on to read and to learn and to study eventually a lot of those tools and strategies to help me navigate my inner world, but also my outer world with a lot more ease. I started to finally find my people, my community, that social support network, which became fundamental in my own journey. And I very much learned that it was okay not to be okay, to speak how it was that you're feeling and to not be ashamed in that. And that it's not only okay to ask for help, that sometimes it's necessary. So reaching out to professionals, working with a therapist was a huge part of my recovery. And so since then, the path hasn't always been easy or straightforward. I'm a human. We have ups and downs all the time. But from then, I started to recognize the difference that understanding my mind and my body and how my nervous system interacted with the world around me, that has gone on to help me with the awareness of things, to catch myself in those moments when I feel maybe things are overloaded or overwhelmed, and to put some supports in place to really help me through those times. That in and of itself has made all the difference. So that led me on now, I guess, to want to share that with others, and not, from a place of, hey, I've got all the answers, but just from a place that recognizes these are some things that have really helped me and stood the test of time, and to help people not just survive, but, thrive and find slower, more meaningful, more connected lives, to be the rule rather than the exception in this crazy world that we're living in at the moment.
It's beautiful that you've been able to make something so meaningful and purposeful out of so much challenge and so much struggle. And there's a saying that we make our work from our wounds. And I talk to a lot of people and I reflect on my own self, and that often we are motivated in our work because of our own experiences. And whilst they're extraordinarily hard to go through at the time, aren't they? And it's listening to you and hearing you talk about your journey, what you've been through. The compassion in me makes me feel for, the 8-year-old you and the 17-year-old you and the 21-year-old you, because we sort of feel so grown up when we're going through life. We realise on reflection that we're so young still, don't we? And those were really extraordinary challenges. And for you to be able to draw on all of that experience and all of what wasn't working, and to learn to think about how you think and how you function, and to be able to make such significant change, it's really such a credit to you. And for you to then to be able to share that with others, I think people can really relate. And especially now, because there's this great resignation, so many people looking for change, looking for more meaning and purpose, and to do things with their time and spend their time and be more present in the activities that they are engaging in. Now, more than ever, arguably, we need this kind of help, because there's so many people looking for what's going to be really fulfilling. How can I look after myself and live a life with great purpose? So it's really, I think, timely that we're talking. One of the things that really stood out to me was how you are able to look at every aspect of what you've been through and see how it's brought you to where you are now. And I wonder, when you started meditating, because it's such a powerful practice, how did you first become connected with meditation, the idea that this is something that is worth trialing? And how did you first get started?
Yeah, meditation has been a huge part of my life, and it's probably been the one thing that has really stood the test of time. Different things that I've tried and tested along the way, but it's been the one thing that's absolutely been consistent. And how that journey began and how that concept of, it potentially being a good idea started when I started practicing yoga, actually. And it's actually how, as a past yoga teacher, I see a lot of people's journeys with meditation beginning, because often it seems like a bit more of an accessible route to go. I think people feel like connecting with their bodies sometimes can be a little bit more accessible than, I think, actually that idea of sitting with yourself, which can be sometimes a bit of a hard jump from, in a world where we're so conditioned to look outside of ourselves, 24/7. So it began when I practiced, and we would get to, I guess, Shavasana, which is at the last, 5 to 10 minutes of a class where you just lie on the ground. And for anyone who knows,
my favourite part. Sorry to interrupt. No, I just put my hands on my heart and just like, it's my favourite part of a yoga class if I'm ever participating. Sorry, Ash, go on.
Not at all. Absolutely. And I mean, I smile because anyone who practices yoga, it's a pretty much a universal feeling. And what I notice, and especially, I have a felt experience of it, and I also have an experience of observing as a facilitator or a teacher, is that when people initially come and practice, it's can be a really uncomfortable thing. I notice, in my own experience again, and as a facilitator, that rigidity and that need to constantly move or fidget or, do something, because it's just something that we're not used to. That idea of non-achieving or non-striving, to actually just sit and be there with yourself and not have anything to tick off a to-do list seems like such a foreign concept. But over time, as you practice, it becomes, and you very quickly discover that it's actually the most important part of the practice. And so that, and the initial, I guess, 5 or 10 minutes of a practice where you might ground through a few breaths or connecting in, and then quickly go on to some movement, that gave me glimpses of it, but it wasn't, the full experience. And I never would have called that meditation at the time. It was more just I guess, that experience of just a little bit of stillness and what that can start to do. And it took for me to go on and do a teacher training in yoga. As part of that, the teacher training that I did, we had to take as part of it an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. So the 8-week, as people might know, it's called MBSR for short. And throughout the yoga teacher training, I learned a lot. But what I was starting to notice was that this Wednesday evening, I remember it was, I think it was 2.5 hours that we would spend for 8 weeks, and we had one full silent day. That very quickly became the most important part of my training, because it was when I started to really uncover that ability to have a little more self-awareness, to understand my mind, to understand my habitual patterns, the tendencies that I had. But also, as part of it, you have to practice meditation for 40 minutes every single day throughout the 8 weeks. And that's a given, that's part of the practice. And so when I began, it was the most spine tingling, gut wrenching, teeth clenching 40 minutes, and struggled my way through, pretty much either I was struggling through or I was fast asleep. That was my initial that was my initial experience. We would do what's called a body scan. And it was the same recording, day in, day out. And it would start at the tips of the toes and end at the top of the head. And usually I'd miss everything from the ankle up until probably the forehead. But eventually what I started noticing, which is exactly what happens with meditation, is it wasn't about what was happening in those 40 minutes at all. It was actually more so what was happening and what was starting to happen and what I was starting to notice when my eyes were open and I was going about my everyday. And I would notice that I was a little bit calmer, I was less reactive. I was a little bit more responsive. I wasn't so harsh to myself, in my own words. I just felt better overall. There was a greater sense of just well-being, and my connections were a little bit deeper. I was having better conversations with people, and all of these things, they weren't something I noticed straight away, but over the course of the 8 weeks, and you have additional work to do, the changes that I was noticing in myself were life-changing. And for someone who always struggled with that voice in her head, for someone who felt like I could just never do enough, never catch a break, the to-do list was always so long, to feel like you had some moments of reprieve in the midst of all of that. And I'm not saying, my mind was clear and life changed overnight. That was definitely not the case. It still is. But to start to notice that things were moving in a direction that was feeling a lot more easeful was incredible, and something that really started to open up my eyes to the world of meditation. And it really, since then, has been a lifelong practice, something that I've continued on with to various degrees and levels of intensity, from anything from, weekend retreats to 10-day silent Vipassanas, that they I've gone through some quite intense experiences, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It's been something that has helped me learn so much about myself, and for that I'm really grateful.
When you talk about the difference it made when your eyes were open, it reminds me of an interview I did with Corey Jackson, who spoke about the idea of, we think often about meditation as just that time on the mat or on the couch or with that mindful cuppa, however it is that you like to practice, not seeing the extension of that cultivation of attention, and then bringing that beautiful attention into our daily life. That's where it's so equally or more powerful. And I reflect on my own experiences starting to meditate and found it equally challenging. And I think it's so lovely that you're so open and honest, and because anyone listening, we both obviously really advocate for mindfulness and meditation as a part of our mental health plan and looking after ourselves. But it's not easy. It's not easy to start with. And it's sometimes, even when you've been doing it for years, it's still not easy. And we need to be compassionate with ourselves and understand that you're never going to get it exactly perhaps how you think you need to do it. You just need to get started. And the idea that you needed to start with 40 minutes a day for an 8-week course is probably very different to how I imagine you start off your beginner meditation students. Can you share a bit with us about how you do start people off when you're running your own courses?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you mentioned there me sharing about my own experiences, and I think that's fundamental. I think, we're all human. None of us has it all figured out. And there can be, I guess, that mindset sometimes of, I guess, the guru versus the student. And it's something that I try hard to dispel as best as I can, because we're all on the journey together. And that's something that I think is really important to share. But for me, and whether it's in any of the programs that I run, or it's just, if anyone, I get questions all the time about how do I start meditating, I always say to start small. When if we think about any sort of habit or goal, or anything that we're trying to work towards, if you were starting to train for a marathon, you wouldn't go out the door and run 40 kilometers as soon as you began. That's just not how it works. So to start small, to whether it's even as much as 3 deep breaths, to even be aware of that to begin with, that is such a gift to give yourself, to just pause in the middle of your day, to reset your nervous system, and you recognize the difference that makes. And I think that checking in pre and post is really important too, because you do start to notice the difference that it has on your well-being, your mindset, your energy levels, and to move from there, to start small, to make it accessible to yourself, whether it's a way that you use a guided meditation or you set a timer on your phone. Sometimes to begin, it's usually more helpful to have that additional guidance. But for others, sometimes, an additional voice on top of a loud mind sometimes can feel like a lot. So the whole practice is very much a practice in mindfulness, because it's very much checking in, how am I doing? Where am I at today? What is it that I need? And how do I support that as best as I can with how it is that I'm going to show up for myself today? Even if it's, how it is that you're actually sitting or lying down. A lot of people have this mindset that, you have to be cross-legged in some sort of lotus position with your mudras, your hand gestures. But for me, in the classes and that I teach and in the programs that I run, it's all about tuning into your own body. How is it that I'm feeling today? Is it more conducive to me finding a little bit more ease if I lie down, or if I'm really exhausted and tired, maybe actually sitting up might be more helpful for me today? Do I need to use a prop because maybe I'm struggling with a bit of an injury, or my bones just aren't made in the way that a lot of people's are, because all bodies are different. It can look very different to each of us, but all that matters is, as we say, that you don't meditate to get better at meditating. You meditate to meet your life with more ease. So that's ultimately what the aim is. So it's usually, start small, go easy on yourself, tune into your body, what it is that you need. Show up for yourself regardless every day, even if it's not for 5-10 minutes, even if it's for those 3 breaths, but just to be consistent, to make yourself that promise, that you're worth it, to whether or not you feel like it on a day, you absolutely are. And to have some level of potentially accountability can be helpful too. We love to tick off a box and, say that we've done something all day, or maybe share with a friend. And also, I think the key that I find for maintaining and sticking to it as a regular habit is to tie it to something that you consistently do on a daily basis. So if it's something like brushing your teeth, or first thing when you wake up, or last thing before you go to bed, or, if you have your cup of tea every morning, something that you already consistently do, our brains love repetition, as you well know, and we've spoken about as well. So anything where it doesn't have to think too much about it, or you get, decision paralysis, that's important as well. So I think start small, be consistent, tie to an existing habit, be accountable, and definitely, above all else, do not give yourself a hard time if you miss. Just show up the next day, and each moment is an opportunity to start again.
What do you say to people who are listening? And I'm even thinking about myself while I'm listening to you. When I get, some days, my days are so full, particularly because I'm trying to do all of my work in the hours when the kids are at school. So I take them to school and I pick them up, and then there's usually activities, or there's a pamphlet round to do, or various other, expectations and duties that I'm undertaking. And I look at the day and I sometimes think I'm too busy to stop. I've got so much going on, and I know intellectually and I know in my heart that the rest and the stop and the pause and the time that I can take for myself is actually going to fuel me better to cope with the demands of my day. And lately I've been much better about that. I've been making myself a really nutritious lunch. My beautiful neighbour, oh my gosh, my beautiful neighbour planted broccoli, kale, cos lettuce, another type of lettuce, and I think it's chives. And she's put it in a planter just over the fence so she can water it. To really, what a kindness. She's just such a kind, beautiful person. She salvages my indoor plants when they're dying. They go over to her hospital. And I'm thinking about it, and I know when I rest, I check in after I've rested, and I know how much better I feel. And most of the time I'm able to do that. But there are some days, and today's one of them, where I feel like I'm running from A to B to C to D, and I feel like, I can't add another thing. What do you say? I don't think I'm alone in that. I imagine a lot of people sort of feel, ironically, too busy to do exactly what's needed some days. What do you say to us?
Absolutely. And I feel that myself. I'm not immune from that either. I think when we're in that state of kind of fight or flight, it's really difficult to press the pause button. But what we need to do, and I think what's helpful in those moments, is that we practice, as much as we can to integrate these things and to build, those muscles of mindfulness and meditation and all the things when we're not stressed, so that we can more easily access them in the times that we need them the most. Because often, when we do feel like we're in those positions where we're overwhelmed, or, we've got a lot on our plate, that idea of stopping just feels like too far out of reach, I think. So for me, in those times, I look at all of the aspects of life and think, okay, how can I start to support myself a little bit better? Like, as you said, things like your nutrition, things like your sleep, who start to really work on your baseline level of well-being. But then for me, how meditation starts to incorporate in that is being really, mindful of sleep, so that I get to bed a little bit earlier, so that I can get up even 5 minutes earlier the next day. And because for me, in those times when I feel like I'm really stressed and overwhelmed and there's a lot on my plate, that's when starting my day from the inside out rather than the outside in becomes absolutely fundamental in me meeting the demands of life. So rather than, all of those external factors like the emails, the social media, the work commitments, all of the things that come from everybody else to start your day off with even just 5 minutes, even when you're lying in bed, as you're waiting for that next snooze alarm to go off because you're exhausted, you have 5 minutes then to even just do a quick body scan, to scan your body from the top of your head down to the bottoms of your feet, and check in and breathe mindfully with that, say, okay, how am I doing today? Can I relax and unclench my jaw, relax through the backs of my eyes, soften my shoulders down and back, let the legs and the arms hang heavy, and even just that in and of itself can be enough to just set that foundation, so that then from there, the rest of the world will still absolutely be there waiting for you. And there's no doubt about that. but you'll be from a much more embodied place. You know, it's not saying that you'll never be reactive or frustrated or, you know, anxious again, but it just means that you just start to make a little bit of a change. And if we can start to build that as a consistent and regular habit, you know, a little often equals a lot. And that's something that I find fundamental for me in any changes that I make. You know, if we started to make one small change every week, that's 52 changes in a year. You know, that's huge when you think about it. So,
Yes, I remember Dr. Forsyth, Dr. John Forsyth, and that was my maiden name. So it's always sort of weird saying that. Forsyth was my maiden name. I remember him saying, "Baby steps will get you up the mountain," and I loved that because he's a globally renowned acceptance and commitment therapy trainer, and it's beautiful because it ties into another beautiful metaphor from ACT, which is going back to what you were saying before, that we are all on our own journey and we are all on our journeys together. And we talk about how I'm on my mountain and you're on yours. And you might look at me and think, I know more about your situation because somehow I've been bestowed with more knowledge and wisdom and experience. But it's often because I'm on my mountain, I've got a different perspective on where you're at. But I'm certainly still climbing my own and trying to take my own steps forward in my own life. It's so from an ACT approach, it's very much, well, I don't necessarily have to have all my ducks in a row to be able to still support you. And you know, I like to say that I'm happy if my ducks are in the same pond, let alone not waiting for them to be in a row anymore. But I think about what you've just shared and the idea that really and truly we all do have a couple of minutes in a day, and there's probably more pressing challenges to be looked after if a couple of minutes in the day is something that you're unable to really carve out for yourself. And when we think about life, is not about getting everything done. It's about the experience. It's about connection. And one of the ways I really bring a mindfulness practice into my day is when I'm connecting with other people. And I used to feel so anxious when I was so highly anxious, and listeners will relate and you'll relate as well. You explained beautifully earlier how you'd predict what you were going to say and you dress rehearse these conversations, because when we're really anxious, we're not able to concentrate on what we're saying, and we can have this verbal diarrhea, and we can get this sort of tightness in our chest and this inability to really listen. And when we can't really tune in and be present with the other person, of course, we're not going to feel like we're able to respond, you know, in appropriate ways at appropriate times. And then we can reflect afterwards on, oh, did I speak too much? Did I talk too much about myself? Did I not ask enough questions? Did I not listen properly when somebody was really sharing something with me? And the idea of us to be able to bring that level of attention, elevated attention into our life, enriches our life in so many ways, doesn't it? And that's one of the things that I do. I try to have moments of mindfulness in my day. And when I connect with people, I really try to cultivate that awareness and be present. Sometimes even earlier when you were talking, my mind drifted just for a moment to the other things that are happening in this busy day. And I just noticed, I observed that thinking. And this all happens in milliseconds, it seems. Observe that I'm having those thoughts and thank my mind and bring my attention right back, because all that's required of me here and now is to be here with you, listening and learning. And then a calm came over me where I'm not focusing on what else has to be done, because everything will get done in its own time. So just the way you speak about bringing these mindful practices into our days in really small ways to start with, and then the benefits kind of make this self-fulfilling willingness that this helps me to feel better, I'm more at ease, this feels good, I'd like to do more. And then the practice continues and it becomes self-supporting in that way, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you notice the difference when you come at a conversation or an interaction from that place. It doesn't matter what it is that we're doing, whether it is, an interaction with another human being, or whether it's a case of we're washing the dishes or when we're putting out the clothes to dry. It's like that study that came from Harvard where they did the Track Your Happiness app, where it was sent to thousands of respondents across multiple years, and they were asked what is it that they were doing, where was their mind on the job, and how they were feeling. And as you well know, over half our lives, it came back that were spent with our mind wandering, with our attention that's not on the job, that what we're doing at that given moment. So that's half the conversations we're missing, half the interactions, half the beauty around us, half the dinners, all the incredible things that make this life worth living. But on the other side, what they also found, which was really remarkable, was that it didn't matter what we were doing, that if our mind was on the job, that the level of contentment, the level of happiness, the level of fulfillment that we found, even if it was washing the dishes, was so much more than if our attention was elsewhere. So when we have that ability to not go around living our lives on autopilot mode, constantly on that treadmill of life, thinking what's next, rehashing what's happened or rehearsing what's to come, when we can find that ability to be more present, to show up to each and every moment, regardless of what it looks like, just as we are, in all that we are, because we can often feel that we're not good enough. But what if we were? What if all that we were in that moment was so much more than enough? Without tending to airy-fairy or, rainbows and unicorns. But as we said, we're all human. We're all just trying to figure it out. No one's got this life thing sorted, or is doing it to perfection. We're all just finding our way and doing the best that we can. So if we can meet that with a little bit more presence, if we can show up fully as humanly possible as we can possibly be, then wouldn't that make just for such a more fulfilling, joyful and meaningful life? I know which I would choose.
Yes. And I know that today's conversation together will have really inspired our listeners to reflect on what they would choose as well, because we can blink, and 9 years have gone by. I caught up with a friend yesterday. We met when our daughters were in 3-year-old kinder, and we started talking yesterday about, I asked, has your daughter started thinking about what to wear for graduation? And because my daughter has, and we counted up the 9 years, and we're like, wasn't that yesterday? And so the time can really fly by. And I think it's saddening in a way when we do have that realization that if we're not mindful, we do miss a lot. And the most important thing that we can be present for is the time with the people around us. And so when we are, even though that there can be some sadness associated with that recognition of having been more disconnected and less present, what I would really invite you to do, if you do feel a little that way, is show yourself compassion and understand that we do what we can. We do the best we can with what we've got. And today's a perfect example of a conversation and an opportunity to learn how to approach things a little bit differently. And I love the saying my mum always said, when we know better, we do better. And just bringing our attention to this idea and knowing that there's a lot to gain. There's so much to gain from dedicating that little bit of time to ourselves and then building on that as we go when we're ready. And so I'm extremely grateful to you, Ash, for sharing today your journey, for sharing your story, for the work that you bring to the world and the support that you give to the community and to the people that are so lucky to work with you. And what I'd really love for you to do is to share with our listeners how they can work with you, how they can connect online. I know you have courses and run retreats, and so please share with us how we can all get in contact and learn more.
Thanks, Jodi. Such a pleasure to speak to you today. And yeah, if anyone is listening that would like to get in touch, I work with individuals and organizations. I run workshops, programs and retreats and certain community initiatives. The best way to get in touch with me is through my website, which is aislingquigley.com.au. It's a very interesting spelling, as I said, Irish. So you might need to look that one up. And on social media, it's Ash, AIS_Quigley.
Thanks, Ash, so much. And it is AISLING. And I'll put all of the places that our listeners can contact you or connect with you and learn more about your work and how you can support them in their own walk with mindfulness and other ways that they'd want to really enrich their mental health and well-being. Thank you, Ash, so very much. I'm very, very grateful for just having this time with you alone, as you were saying before about softening your shoulders and unclenching your jaw and just letting our limbs hang a little bit heavy. That alone, just a little reminder about that through the day can really help us approach the day with less stress, less tension and more mindfulness. So you've shared so much. I'm very grateful. So thank you so much once again. Thanks, Ash. And thank you everyone so much for tuning in. Aren't we lucky to have people like Aisling who share their wisdom, their experience and expertise so generously with us. I feel super grateful. So thank you for joining me. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.